Because when we think about businesses and we think about entrepreneurship and we think about growing anything, the core is always trust. So self-knowledge, try to figure out what another person's style might be, start to slowly over time tailor communication to him or her in a way that they start to trust you at the deep level. And all of a sudden now the relationship takes off.
Welcome to Summer First Experience. In this show, we'll be covering everything a new entrepreneur needs to know to set up their business and how you can grow and scale your business in the shortest possible time. If you have a question in mind, go to salmanfarsi.co/ask and submit your question. We might answer it in the next episode. Let's begin our today's episode. Michael S. Seaver is an award-winning executive coach, leadership consultant, keynote speaker, and author. His newest book, I Know, is a how-to guide Michael uses with clients, walking them through the 3 phases of personal transformation. Today we're going to talk about core values. Let's start our today's episode. Today we have an amazing guest, Michael. So, welcome, Michael.
Hi, Simon. How are you today?
I'm good. What about you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me as a guest.
It's my pleasure. For a listener who don't know about you, tell us a bit about yourself. How do you got to where you are today? Basically, your story.
Yeah, thank you. So I live in Phoenix, Arizona currently. I was raised in a very small town in West Michigan in the United States. Worked for a family landscaping, lawn maintenance, and snowplowing business for about 12 years. And then in the year 2003, moved to the state of Arizona and worked in the hospitality industry for about 4 years. And then 2008, the economy in America was struggling a little bit. So I went to the Thunderbird School of Global Management and finished an MBA. And it was there that I decided that I wanted to be an executive coach. So as a second-year student in the master's degree program, I was able to coach first-year students. And I just realized that I completely lost track of time doing that. So when I finished the master's degree, I went to work for a large not-for-profit healthcare system in human resources. And I realized that it was nice to have the car and the house and the money and those things, but I felt very unfulfilled. So I wanted to be able to start my own business. So in October of 2011, so now almost 10 years ago, I started my coaching practice. And back then it was resumes and cover letters and LinkedIn work and interview work. And then it matriculated into understanding a little bit more about communication styles. And then it moved into more executive coaching and understanding personal branding. In the last few years, I've been really focused on organizational development and change management consulting. And at the beginning of 2021, I published a book called I Know. And that's really a culmination of all of my life's experiences brought together like in a really meaningful way to help a person go from that place of being disengaged and unhappy to a place, hopefully, of being really clear and confident about what their life's next steps are. So every day today, I get to be an executive coach. I get to be a leadership consultant. I get to work on and write things. I get to speak publicly. But at the end of the day, like my life's mission is to unlock human potential. And I'm just so blessed that I have a lot of different vehicles that I can do that.
That's amazing. We'll talk about your book in the later. So
sure.
What does it look like to be an executive coach and leadership coach?
Yeah. For me, it's my life's work, right? I discovered in 2009 as a student at Thunderbird that it was going to be my life's work. So executive coaching day to day, normally when someone engages me as a coach, we sign for a 6-month agreement and I meet with the clients every 2 weeks for about 90 minutes. And so I have a 6-month process that I try to walk each of the clients through. And there are multiple steps and there are really important things that they have to do at each step in order to get the learning out of it. But I'm in touch with them every 2 or 3 days via email or via phone or via text, just to make sure that they're making progress on the homework that he or she has. So I get to spend a lot of time hearing about their life's work and their life's mission and what they're focused on. What are their core values? What are the things that they're trying to accomplish for their family or for themselves professionally? And I think one of the things that people often forget is that executive coaching just isn't helping someone at work. Executive coaching is helping the whole person, right? It's helping them in every area of their life, personally and professionally. And so although for branding purposes, I say that I'm an executive coach, I'm also a health coach, a life coach, right? Kind of a spiritual mental coach, and then a career coach. And so it kind of all comes together in one that I can really help bring together those two pieces of that person, who they are at work and who they are at home. So I've got a very defined process. I spend a lot of time listening and offering suggestions and asking a lot of questions of people. But I absolutely love being able to unlock human potential, right, in each of the persons that I talk to.
That's awesome. How can we unlock someone's full potential, human potential?
It is the way that I look at this. There are many ways that we go about it, right? And so let me explain it conceptually, high level, and then I'll explain it in a little bit more depth in the way that I do it, and then maybe it'll make sense. So the way that I perceive this or do this, and you even talk about this on your website, Salman, where it's for the first probably 25 to 30 years of our lives, we have a recurring set of challenges that happen to us or for us. And then around age 28, 29, 30, we find a way to overcome those challenges. So then our mission or our purpose or how we can unlock our own potential from about age 30 to about age 50 is to help others overcome the exact same challenge that we just overcame. Right. So it's very healing for us, but we're also now healing other people. Right. And that's conceptually, that's how I look at it, is what's the challenge that the person just went through? How did he or she overcome it? Who can they now help overcome that as well? Right. That matters. So that's conceptually. Now, the way that I dive down into that is to look at it a little bit more through how do I teach a person something about themselves that they wouldn't know? So if a person is really unsure about what their life's next steps are, or how do I take and expose them to their own potential, if you will, the way that I look at this is I have 5 tools that I talk about that really help this person get to a point of clarity. And the first tool is a personality assessment or a communications assessment. I'm certified to use the DISC assessment, but sometimes people use the predictive index or Myers-Briggs or emergenetics. There's a number of them that are out there. But what that does is it teaches a person how they prefer to communicate if they didn't already know, right? That's number one. That's a big one. Number 2 is I also have access to another assessment that's about what motivates us. And there are 12 core human motivators. And so I help them to focus in on the top 4. And really what that is that's an unconscious why you do what you do. Right. So number 1 disc is communication. How do you show up in the world? Number 2, motivators. Why do you do what you do? And number 3, core values, right? What are those lessons that you've learned over time? What are those things that you care about most? And so I have an activity that I put people through either with a card deck or with an online activity that helps them narrow down what values are most important to them. Now, the 4th puzzle piece, and this is the hardest one for people because in many societies around the world, we don't really openly talk about emotions the way that you and I do on our respective websites and in our respective journeys, is that I have a 10-point Q&A that is designed to help people see the patterns from their past to set a benchmark or a baseline for who they are today, and then for them to set goals into the future. Right? What do they want their future to look like? And now the 5th thing is the idea of what's their authority, what makes them different or unique in the marketplace. So by bringing these 5 things together, what I help them to do is find the patterns across all 5. And it's inside the patterns, that's where the potential is unlocked. Because when people start to see data that's dispersed amongst all of these different data sets, and then all of a sudden they see that there's consistencies across all 5, now all of a sudden they're like, okay, that must be true to who I am. And then that's where the unlocking part comes, is because all of a sudden they see themselves in a new light. And then all of a sudden they can write a personal mission statement, or they can write or look at their top 5 or 6 core values, or they can write basically a biography that's like a unique value proposition for who they are as a person. And if they choose to, they can set, a couple like 2 or 3 year goals that are really metrics driven. So it's in that they then have the chance to experiment and to try and to see where it is that they can go from there. So unlocking human potential is oftentimes, where are you today? What do you not know about yourself? How can you go through a process to bring some of those things to the surface? And then how do you go experiment and try with a few of those things in a way that really helps you to know what you're capable of?
Okay. So how can we improve our communication skill?
So that one takes a lot of time, right? Because our society isn't really, we really don't do this well, at least in America and Western countries. I don't know about in Asia where you're at, Zaman, but maybe. So if we look at this through the lens of the DISC assessment, which I'm certified to use, each of the respective quadrants, the DIS or C, what's important to understand is that each of them has a specific orientation, like their brain is oriented a certain way, extrovert versus introvert, people-oriented versus task-oriented. So we open up lines of communication by first knowing ourselves, right? What's our default communication preference or style? So each of those respective styles, DIS or C, has an underlying fear, right? So we know what it is that we might fear out of life. Each of those 4 styles also has a preferred negotiation or conflict style. Like, how do we process conflict, or what do we do when we're negotiating with something? So that's a really, really big place of awareness for ourselves. Now, these profiles also tell us around what our default body language might be so that we can see it in ourselves, but also see it in others. And then there's also a great capacity in each of those styles to understand what is our emotion under stress. So I say all of that to say, by doing this one simple assessment, you learn an awful lot about yourself, right? What are those things that I am as a default? So then what I encourage people to do to open up lines of communication is to choose 2 or 3 people around them that have really different communication styles. And then we try to give them one of the DIS or C styles, right? To just say, okay, I think that they might be this style, but I'm not sure. So I'm going to try to communicate to him or her in the way that they probably want to receive the information, right? So if I'm an extrovert communicating to an introvert, I would have to really change my body language and my tone of voice and my word choice to really appeal to them, right? Or if I'm task-oriented communicating to a people-oriented person, I can't talk about logical facts, figures, and data. I have to talk about emotions and stories and relationships. So once we know self-knowledge, and once we can start to see the patterns in others' behavior to know what they might be in terms of communication, now we can start to tailor our body language, our tone of voice, and the word choice that we have to those people in a way that they start to trust us much more deeply. Right. And that matters immensely, because when we think about businesses and we think about entrepreneurship and we think about growing anything, the core is always trust. So self-knowledge, try to figure out what another person's style might be, start to slowly over time tailor communication to him or her in a way that they start to trust you at the deep level. And all of a sudden now the relationship takes off.
Absolutely. Sometimes I get confused. I'm an introvert or I'm an extrovert. Or I'm a mixture.
It's possible to be kind of on the fence, Salman. So it's like you can be, and it can be contextual too. So I have a default in myself to be an introvert, right? So on the DIS or C profile, I have 2 high styles that are introvert, but I have 1 that's extroverted. So I can be in the right situations extrovert, and maybe you're kind of on that fence too. It's like you can be both.
Yeah, sometimes it's like I can talk with someone for hours, and sometimes it's like I don't know what to say.
And that's A-okay too.
Yeah. So let's talk about core values. So what is core value, and why it's important to discover one's core value?
Yeah. When you think about core values, I just explained a second ago that it's kind of a piece or a part of a bigger puzzle that helps a person know what they're capable of, right? So the way that I look at core values are, these are the things or the guidelines or the markers by which you would want to make choices and decisions in your life, right? So when we're doing this activity to uncover what someone's core values are, we always want to come back to the basics of and say, okay, core values are a belief, right? They're a recurring pattern or behavior that you have in your life. They're lessons that you've learned as you've navigated life. And so which core values do you default to when you're making your most difficult choices, right? Through the lens of what legacy do you want to leave for those around you? Or what core values do you want to be remembered by? Or what are those things that you want to pass on to the next generation when they hear your name? Right. So core values are really these lessons learned, or these attitudes, or these beliefs, or these legacies and things that you want to pass on to this next generation of people, or maybe to your family. So once we get a little bit of a basis or an understanding of saying, hey, here's, let's say 55 core human values, let's go through a process of whittling those 55 down to your top 6. And so I go through a process with the client, whether it's with a card deck or over an online assessment, and we get down to their top 6. And then we force rank those 6 in order from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. And what that does is it really helps a person to understand what's most valuable to them. What do they want to spend the most time doing? What are those activities that really bring them joy and happiness, right? And so what I want them to do is to think about today, what % of your day are you living your core values? And oftentimes the answer is pretty small because they're not aware of what their core values are. There aren't many places on earth where people openly talk about their core values. But I think we're moving into a time in human history where we're going to talk about them more.
Yeah.
And so if people first start with doing the activity and then they look at their day and say, I'm not really living my core values very much. Well, then what I want them to do is an activity where they can uncover other activities creatively that they might do that are connected to that specific core value, right? So I'll just have them write down the left-hand side of a sheet of paper, hey, here's my top 6 core values, and then brainstorm as many ways as possible that I could live these core values more. And if they did that, then over the next couple of weeks, then it's really just an activity of how much time in a week can they devote to trying something new and just experimenting with it and feeling if it makes sense for them or not. Right. And maybe it does make sense. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe they're interested in it. Maybe they're not. But at least they experimented and were creative and were innovative and tried, because that's what matters. Is that we as a species, humans learn experientially. We don't learn necessarily from what we read in a book. That helps to be a data point for us to help make decisions later. But when we engage the 5 human senses and we really feel an emotion about something, that's how we learn faster. So that's why I want them to think about their life, understand their core values, think about what % of the day they're living them, and then go find new ways to live it more, because that helps them to learn at a really deep level.
That was nice. Sorry for the interruption. This is a short break. Looks like you're really enjoying the episode. I have a small request. After finishing this, please leave a review on Apple Podcast. It means the world to me. And reach out to me. I would love to hear from you. You will find the contact details below. Let's continue. So what is the process of creating someone's core value? How can someone identify their core values?
So I use an organization based in Portland, Oregon, in America. And there are many online activities that can do the same thing. So this organization in Portland, Oregon, they have a card deck where each of the 55 cards has a different core value on it with a couple of synonyms underneath. But they also have an online activity that if somebody wants to do it online, they can do that too. And there's probably quite a few others around the world that do the same thing. But the fastest way to do this, or the best way to do this, is to find probably an online activity that helps you to understand what your core values are. Do the online activity to take a very large pile of core values and to whittle them down to your top 5 or 6. So that's the process. But more conceptually, what I ask people to do as they're going through that process is to think about what are the things that were most important to them in the last 6 to 12 months when they were making their most difficult decisions and choices, right? So when you call that into your mind, why did I choose this, or why would I choose this, or why is this important to me? You can always come back to the core value, right? So my top core values are authenticity, growth, and spirituality. And there are many reasons why those are my top 3, right? And if you read my book, there's a lot of material in the book that kind of talks about that, especially in chapter 4, because there was a series of events that occurred to me when I was younger that really helped me desire authenticity and helped me to live it at a really meaningful way. And so I just want people to know that there are online activities that can be done, but really what it's about is taking time for reflection, taking a step back. What were those events that happened in my life? What are those things that I really value? How do I want to be remembered? And if we do that, I think that's where the power is for a person to be able to walk into knowing themselves much more deeply.
Absolutely. Leaving a legacy is hard.
It really is. Yeah, there's so many things that change in society, right? And so it's like the things that we used to do really, really well, all of a sudden we can't. And so, most of 2020, I was working as an executive coach and spending time working with one organization to change their organizational culture. And, my work is about unlocking human potential, and that can happen in a lot of ways. And I wasn't expecting the success of my book to be what it is. And so I had to shift and transition in 2021 to leading more like book clubs and reading groups and masterminds and CEO roundtables, because people wanted the information from the book, but they wanted to learn from one another, not just from me. And so when you think about how do you leave your legacy, well, there has to be a core. You have to know what your personal mission is. You have to know what your core values are. You have to know what your goals are. But how something happens is going to shift and change. So I expected to keep that big contract going last year, and that I was going to continue to do that work into 2021. Well, things changed and that contract disappeared. And then all of a sudden now I have to think about, how do I live my core values? How do I help others, right, in a really meaningful way? And the book and the, kind of the book club that came from it is the perfect next step. And so as long as we're consistent with living our mission or living our core values, how something gets applied is a lot less important than the fact that we are applying it. So it's just being consistent over a very long period of time.
There are a couple of questions coming into my mind. So how can we integrate our core value with our company values?
Sure. That one is, that to me seems pretty simple in terms of process. But again, it comes back to the person being really well aware of themselves. And so if they've done the core values activity, and if they've done the personal brainstorming activity where they're like, hey, I really want to be able to do these core values more day to day, then they can brainstorm ways to do that. Now, what I encourage clients to think about is to grab the organization that they work for, whether it's their full-time employer, whether it's a not-for-profit or some sort of charitable entity that they're involved in. What we really want them to do is to take their core values on one sheet of paper and the organization's core values on another sheet of paper and compare them side by side. And do you see commonalities or synonyms from one to the next? So oftentimes it'll just be like, hey, well, I value authenticity. Can I find a desire for authenticity somewhere inside this organization's values? Or I value integrity. How can I see, is there a connection within this employer, within this not-for-profit? Do they value integrity too? Or if I value family, do I work inside of an organization that really espouses or lives this value of family as well? So most of the time, people will find a connection between their personal core values and their organization's core values just by doing a side-by-side comparison. And then saying, how often do I get to live these, or how well do I get to live these? Or can I ask my boss or my employer to be able to live them more? Because sometimes people do that too. So it's really an easy side-by-side comparison, but it's a great way to make sure that the outcome is that you feel more engaged and you're more productive in your work. You're more happy working with an organization that you really feel connected to. Because in our heart and soul, we all want to grow and develop, but we all desire to contribute to something bigger than ourselves and to help a bigger organization grow and develop too. Yeah. Right. So it's finding that good mix.
So how can we stay strong with our core value?
It's hard, because especially in many societies around the world, society says that we should do one thing, but we oftentimes want to do the other thing, right? And so as we're going through these transformations on Earth right now, in a very astrological sense, Earth is transitioning from what astrologists call the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. And in America, NASA refers to it as the precession of the equinoxes. And so what that is that we're moving from one time in human history into this next time. And during this 10 or 20 year transition, it's really uncomfortable because there's a lot of people that are focused on the way that it has been done. And there are lots of younger folks who are trying to create this new, more utopian version of Earth. And it's a tough transition, really tough. But the way that we stay really focused on it is by spending time with like-minded people, right? So at the core is that the human species is a very social species. So if we, number one, know our mission, know our core values, and know who we are, and we openly share that with the world, a tribe of people will come to us. Right? I couldn't have expected that you and I would have met, Salman, but our stories are quite similar. And so even though we're on very different sides of Earth, we're very similar in our hearts. Right. And so this is how it works, is that both of us put out into the universe what we care about, who we are, what makes us different. And all of a sudden we get to meet, have these conversations and continue a relationship. So know the self first, openly share yourself with others. The tribe of people will come to you. And inside that tribe, that's where you spend more time sharing your story, hearing other people's stories, helping one another, growing and developing, because as time passes, this tribe of people will get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's really the goal, is to make it bigger, is to help more people. So then all of a sudden it matriculates into, all of a sudden now you've got an entire organization, or you have an entire city or state that are really heavily connected into this new way of being. So let's just keep that going.
Absolutely. So is it possible to change someone's core value?
I don't know if there's enough research on this yet to be sure one way or the other. The way that I've seen it done, especially with all of the folks that I've helped through it, is that, let's say, like, even though I focus on their top 5 or 6 core values, like the top 10 or 11 or 12, they're pretty much the same throughout the person's life. But the way that I've seen it is that, let's say number 10, because of some event that happens in someone's life, number 10 becomes number 4 for a short period of time. Or then number 2, just because there's something happens in life, it moves up to number 8, right? And they don't focus on it quite as much. So can we change someone's core values? I don't think we can change them, but do we express them differently depending on what's happening around us? I think that that's more true. So I try to get people to focus in on their top 5 or 6, but sometimes if things happen, if they lose a loved one, or they move, or they change jobs, or they start their own business, different core values will come up because the environment around them has changed. So I still think that for the most part, they're going to remain the same, but we might express them or live them a little bit differently depending on what's happening close to us.
Okay. What is the connection between core values and purpose?
So I think that every human comes to Earth with what I refer to as an Earth School curriculum, right? But some people say it's a personal brand. Some would say it's a purpose. Some would say it's a personal mission. I think that we come to Earth with that kind of already determined. And so the way that I see core values is that those values are how we live that purpose, right? And so the why, the purpose or the mission is why we do what we do, but it's not necessarily a physical thing. But the core values are like, here's how we live it. So the mission is like the why. The core values are like the how or the what, right? This is how we apply this. This is what we're going to do in order to live the mission. So they're connected. They should almost be identical, or you should see pieces of both inside each other, right? My personal mission is about unlocking human potential. Well, if I value authenticity, that's unlocking human potential. If I value growth, that's unlocking human potential, right? So they're connected, but one is more the why, and the other is a little bit more the how and the what.
Absolutely. So how can someone find their purpose? It's like, I'm also looking for the purpose of my life.
Yeah. And so it kind of goes back to what we talked about a little bit at the beginning. It's like, what was the challenge? How did you overcome the challenge? How do you help others? So the individual's purpose is going to come out of those 5 tools that I talked about: the DISC, the motivators, the core values, the 10-point Q&A, and the authority. So the purpose comes out of the patterns that exist across that information. So they all, like, really what I try to do when I'm helping a client through this is we do the 5 tools and collect that data. We identify 6, 7, or 8 patterns that we see across all of the data points. And then the purpose, the personal mission statement, is the very first thing we write. And so it always starts the same. It's always, I exist to, and then the person fills in the blank, right? But they're using a good awareness of themselves, right? Their communication styles, what motivates them, their core values, are using these life circumstances and events to help say, I think this is who I am, and this is how I'm going to add value to the world. So that's probably the easiest way. that to do it. In other, organizations that are more focused on astrology and numerology, there's books and resources about that too that can help. But in a very, like traditional business sense for a person who is really accustomed to that, these 5 steps are likely the things that are going to give them a lot more clarity faster.
Sorry for the interruption. This is a short break. Looks like you're really enjoying the episode. I have a small request. After finishing this, please leave a review on Apple Podcast. It means the world to me. And reach out to me. I would love to hear from you. You will find the contact details below. Let's continue. Let's talk a little bit about your book.
Okay.
Your book title is I Know. So what motivates you to write your book? Yeah.
Here it is, right? So
yeah.
I Know, a practical guide for awakening to what's within and finding work-life integration. This is the funny thing about, books in general, is that I was at this point in my life that through many clients, they told me that I needed to write a book and tell my story or to tell my clients stories. And I was so nervous. I was so anxious. I was so stressed. I didn't believe that my story mattered, right? I genuinely didn't believe that it mattered. So I kept putting it off. I kept not thinking about it. I kept not doing anything. And then in March, April, May of 2020, when a lot of things shifted around Earth with the pandemic, I started to slow down and I started to realize that I was going to have a little bit more time because I couldn't travel quite as much. So I was just like, this summer of 2020 is the ideal time for me to now take the advice of all these people and do something with this. So I hired a writing coach in the summer of 2020. And for about 6 months, she and I went back and forth to create the book. And so I was reluctant to do it. I didn't feel safe doing it, but partnering with her, she really helped me tell my story really powerfully. And so I'm so thankful that I engaged her in that way, because the book itself it's like for a person who's disengaged or unhappy or unsure of what to do with their life, the book is 9 core chapters that walk them from how do they end and let go of this old version of themselves to how do they go into like an emotional neutral zone where they just experiment and try. And then the last 3 chapters are much more focused on how do they launch into these new beginnings. And if they do all 9 of these things, they're going to come out happy and clear and productive and engaged and full of joy. So I didn't really want to write the book. All of a sudden, the universe created a circumstance where it was the right time to write it. And I'm so thankful that I invested that time because it allowed for me to reflect. It allowed for me to tell my story, to tell client stories, to do some research, to be able to give out processes in a new way. And I've already gotten a lot of really strong feedback from people that they didn't know those things about my life, or they didn't realize that there was a process for navigating some of the hardships that life offers. And I'm so glad that the book got to them at those moments to be able to help them through those challenging circumstances. So this is the thing, is that we don't always know the impact that our work is going to have, but it's oftentimes more profound than we can imagine.
Absolutely. So did you write your story by your own?
No, the writing coach was really instrumental because what we did was we designed a thesis in an overarching feel for what the book was going to be. And then we went through the 9 core chapters and designed a thesis for each of those chapters. And then what we did is we used a 5-part framework on every chapter, which is we open with a story. We show what the thesis is. We then share some research. We then share a 5 or a 6-step process. And then we do a closing story from another client or from my life. And then we do key takeaways. So we had a very structured process that we were following to design the book and also to write it. So then the writing coach and I sat down every other Thursday at 9 a.m. local time. And we went through, and she basically interviewed me and helped me tell my story. And then we took the stuff that I talked about in those interviews and we turned it into the chapters. And so that took a while, right? It took us quite some time to be able to get it quite right. But after the first draft was done, I went for a weekend over in California in Los Angeles, and I just sat there and for about 32 or 33 hours, I just edited and added and tweaked and adjusted and really made sure it was mine. And then I sent the book to 6 of my friends around the world. And I said, I need your perspective on this. Are there any holes in this? What would you change? What would you do differently? And I really made sure that those 6 people were like my target demographic, right? Those people that would really end up reading the book. And so thankfully, they gave me a lot of really solid feedback. So I made some adjustments and tweaks to the book, and the writing coach jumped in and offered some additional help too. And so it took a long time, right? 9.5 or 10 months to do the whole thing. But it was so enormously beneficial for me to tell my story and to tell other stories and to go through this process, because I promise you, Simon, I could not have done it alone. I just know that.
It's hard to write your own story.
It totally is.
I tried to write the summary of my life and took around a month. Sometimes it happens that I sit down to write something. I couldn't write for hours. I was sitting down there. Okay, so what would be your advice for the people who have just started their business?
So, getting something off the ground, there are so many good resources nowadays, right? When you think about how do you start something from scratch. So I started my business 10 years ago, and there were so many things that I did that I look back on as like, gosh, I could have done that differently. But I think there are so many resources nowadays where we can go to accelerators and incubators, and there are lots of resources online to be able to help people find a way to be able to start. So I always encourage folks to start inside of some sort of structured process. If it's an incubator, if it's an accelerator, if it's via a group of people, it really does help to be a part of something bigger than yourself, because you get a lot of different and unique ideas, and you get a lot of people that are going to hold you accountable, and you get a lot of people that genuinely want to see you successful, right? So whatever you do, don't try to do it 100% alone. Make sure that you use some sort of community resource or group of individuals to help with that, because you can do things like the business model canvas and be very clear about customers and value proposition and revenue streams and what channels are you going to market and how do you form those relationships with your customers. And so all of those things are really valuable, but we also really have to come back to is as we're doing this, what makes you, your service or your product really different in the marketplace? Right? And how do you engage people in a really meaningful way by engaging their senses or by getting that minimally viable product into their hands in a way that they really can see how it would benefit them? So I think we've moved to this place in society that if we do things via a group, we get further faster, I think. And if we're okay with making mistakes and learning from them and iterating a little bit faster, that's even better. Because when I first started as a coach, I didn't have a formal coaching process. And I realized that I was continually overserving and undercharging clients, right? I was spending a lot of time doing a free service and I shouldn't have done that. But it was all because I lacked confidence and I didn't surround myself with the right people to help me in that launch. So I spent a lot of time trying to fit in and do what other people were doing, as opposed to just really being my authentic self, right? What is it that I need to put out into the world? How do I do that? So just make sure that everybody listening, that you find a group to collaborate in, to have that pure accountability that allows for you to iterate faster. And then don't worry about the mistakes or the failures. Those are just learnings that will help the next version of your product or service be that much better.
That was nice. So you'd like to share some of your mistakes? Yeah, we spent 10 years on this industry. So what mistakes have you done and what you have learned from it?
Yeah, I mentioned a couple just a second ago with regards to the coaching process. The biggest thing that I think that there were kind of a couple things is that the thing that I look back on those last 10 years of coaching is that I was trying to fit into society as opposed to really authentically being myself. Right. And so not having the coaching process, overserving and undercharging the clients and working for free because I lack the confidence, trying to fit in as opposed to just being me. I didn't really do a great job of partnering with others or collaborating with others, maybe as much as I could. So instead of trying to be everything to everybody, which I did for the first few years of my business, I really want people to think about it through the lens of how hyper niche can you be? Right? Because I realized as I was providing resume writing and cover letter support and interview support all those years ago, that I was going to do best if I helped a master's degree student, because that was my background or that's what I knew. But then I went out to the marketplace and I tried to do it for everybody. And I kept running into blockades, like I wasn't making enough revenue or I'd have to take a part-time job temporarily. And I wish that I would have been more niche in that way. So more recently, what I've realized is that my message seems to land really well with accounting or finance organizations or departments. And so I didn't realize that for a number of years, but today I spend a lot more time with people and organizations and not-for-profits and professional associations and community groups that are based on finance and accounting, because that's where my business thrives. So instead of being everything to everybody, I've chosen to go really hyper niche to be able to find clients that are in those respective areas or speaking at those events or fill in the blank. So I just want everybody to be like, it's okay to make mistakes, take some time for reflection to learn from them. Make sure you iterate a lot, because I used to only write resumes and I haven't written a resume in years, right? And being okay with being a part of a group or people around you to help hold you accountable is the thing that's going to catapult your business to that next level.
How can someone discover themselves?
So this happens in a lot of ways, right? So discovery is, I think today, discovery is more experiential. So, we can read books and we can, listen to podcasts and we can watch videos and we can watch movies and all those things. And of course, there's going to be learning from all of those things. But I'm a big fan of what is now referred to as the 10-20-70 principle. And so 10% of most learning occurs in a formal setting where there's some sort of an assessment or a quiz or a test. 20% comes from conversations like this, right? Where we're able to learn from peers and from colleagues about mistakes they've made or wins they've had or ways to go about something. But the real learning and discovery comes through the 70%, right? Which is experiential learning. Like you have to get out there and you have to try things. You have to talk to new people. You have to travel to new places. You have to take time for reflection to kind of crash ideas together. You have to give presentations. So discovery in that sense is collect some information from somebody in the 10%. Like if you want to become a project management professional or similar, do the exam, but then you got to go talk to people, right? Who are those mentors? Who are those coaches? Who are those consultants? And who are those podcast hosts like Salmon that you can talk to and listen to, right? Yeah. But then it really is about discovery comes from then you trying and experimenting and iterating on that thing. So that's where the self-discovery comes from, is you start to see what you lose track of time doing, because that's how you know you love it. Or if you feel really drained or exhausted by the end of it, you shouldn't spend more time doing that. So what I do at the beginning of every month, on the first of every month, is I have a 3-hour time block that I use to reflect on the previous month. And so through all of the experimenting, through all of the experiential learning that I do, I keep a journal. And on the first of the month, I look back at the previous 30 days to say, what did I learn? Right? What emotions did I feel? Who did I help? What should I do differently? What did I love? And by taking that time for reflection, I'm now able to adjust where I spend time in the next month. And that helps me to learn even more about myself and to discover more about myself. So you're not going to discover it overnight. And as life progresses, it's going to shift and transition because there's so many things shifting and transitioning on Earth. So it's best just to get in the flow with whatever the universe is going to do. And then that's where your real power is just kind of surrendering the how, but staying much more focused in on why you're doing something and constantly learning from all of the things that you encounter.
Finding the why I'm doing something, it's really hard.
Yeah, it really is. And I think maybe that's where the reflection comes in, is to be able to kind of come back to the basics to say, what is my mission, or what are my core values, or, what motivates me? And then you have to spend a little bit of time practicing and doing those things. And then all of a sudden clarity comes.
Okay. So we're almost at the end. So where can our listener find you?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Salman. I appreciate it. So I do spend quite a bit of time on social and trying to share things there, but the best place to be able to learn more about me is michaelseaver.com. 2 S's in the center because my middle name is Scott. So michaelseaver.com. You're going to see a lot of videos. You can see a lot of media mentions, 200 plus articles and blogs. I've got 5 or 6 different free downloads there that people can use or help. So I have my own podcast that I've interviewed folks on in the past. So it's kind of a hub or a central repository of resources for people who are wanting to go from that place of disengagement or not being clear about their purpose, that if they engage some of those resources, they'll be able to find much more clarity for themselves. So I just want everybody to visit michaelseaver.com or follow me on LinkedIn or follow me on Instagram, because I spend a fair amount of time on both of those channels too.
Great. So that's how we end it. And it's ended.
That's awesome.
Thanks for joining us today. Hit the subscribe button. And if you're listening this on Apple Podcast, please leave a review. This will really help us to make our future episodes better. Have a question in mind? Go to sonofercy.co/ask and submit your question. We see every submission and we might answer it in the next episode. Thanks again for listening. We will see you on Tuesday and Thursday. Have a great week.